예, 지금부터 지구와 사람 5주년 기념 컨퍼런스를 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 참석해 주신, 온라인이지만 이렇게 참석해 주신 우리 선생님들께 감사드리고요. 저희 그 5주년 기념 컨퍼런스가 오늘부터 시작해서 내일까지 이틀간 생명과 공동체의 미래라고 하는 주제로 이제 다뤄지게 되겠습니다. 오늘은 지금 이제 미국의 클레몬 칼리지에 계시는 존 캅 교수님을 모시고 스페셜 스피치를 드렸고요. 그리고 기꺼이 허락을 해주셨습니다. 인간과 생명이라고 하는 주제로 오늘 말씀을 해주시겠는데, 이제 주로 대담 형식으로 하면 좀 진행이 될 것 같습니다. 저도 사실은 준비가 오늘 안 된 상태이긴 하지만 일반적으로 하는 것보다는 교수님께서 이제 많은 대화를 나누기를 원하시고요. 그리고 여기 참여하신 선생님들께서도 이제 질문을 던지시고 그리고 같이 이제 얘기할 수 있는 시간이 있을 것 같습니다. 먼저 제가 종갑 교수님 잠깐 소개를 드리고 그리고 시작하면서 한 두세 가지 정도의 질문을 던질 거고요. 그리고 이후에 한 세 가지 정도 질문이 끝나고 각각 답을 하시고 그 후에는 이제 선생님께서 자유롭게 이제 질문을 해주시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 먼저 종갑 교수님을 잠깐 간단하게 소개해드리면요. 종갑 교수님은 워낙 유명하신 분입니다. 하나의 학문 분야를 만드셨고, 그 프로세스 디올로지라고 하는 분야를 만드셨고, 그리고 프로세스 필로소피 분야에 있어서는 이제 알프레드 노먼 화이트헤드의 그 철학이죠. 프로세스 필로소피와 프로세스 디올로지의 아주 세계적인 학자이십니다. 그리고 특히 이제 종교와 과학, 영성과 과학을 융합하고 여러 종교들 간의 대화를 이끌어내시고, 그리고 특히 환경 생태 운동가로서도 굉장히 활동을 많이 하고 계십니다. 그 아카데미아에서 아주 탁월한 연구 업적을 가지고 계실 뿐만 아니라 액티비스트로서 사회 참여를 하면서 세상을 바꾸는 일에도 아주 열심히 일을 하고 계십니다. 지금 현재 특히 이제 2014년도에 종캅 교수님께서는 미국 예술과학 아카데미 회원 정회원으로 초청을 받으셨고요. 그리고 이제 현재 클레몬 칼리지에 있는 네, 죄송합니다. 종캅 교수님은 프로세스 스터디, the Center for Process Studies 클레몬에 있는 과정 연구소라고 하는 곳의 코파운더로 이제 계시고요. 그리고 화이트헤드 관련되는 여러 가지 연구 분야를 이끌고 계십니다. 특히 한 50권 이상의 아주 탁월한 이제 저술 활동을 하셨고요. 그 중에 한국 분들에게도 많이 알려져 있는 책들 몇 개를 소개하자면 Common Good, 공동의 선이라고 하는 제목의 책과 생명의 해방, Christian Natural Theology, 기독교 자연 신학, 그리고 Sustaining the Good, Common Good이라고 하는 그런 책들을 쓰셨습니다. 워낙 소개할 내용이 너무너무 많지만 이거 하다 보면은 시간이 갈 것 같아서 교수님에 대한 소개는 이제 이것으로 마치도록 하겠습니다. 이어서 이제 종캅 교수님 모시고 이제 톡을 들을 건데요. 이제 잠깐 교수님하고 제가 잠깐 얘기하도록 하겠습니다. Hi, Professor John Cobb. I'm very glad you to be joining our conference, special conference, 5th anniversary conference here. And this year, the title of our 5th anniversary conference is Without Life, Where is the Future? And we are going to discuss the subject, human being and life, with you in this special session. And as we already briefly discussed, and I will bring up three main questions to you, and you can answer each answer just briefly, and then I also encourage people who participate in this conference to bring up their own questions so that you can answer each audience question. So let me bring up. Is it okay? Can you hear me clear?
Yes, and I will speak a little bit and then you will translate.
No, I don't. Actually, everybody here can understand English.
Everybody understands. Well, that's
Yeah, it's all
amazing.
from.
Wonderful.
Okay. So,
All
and
right.
yeah,
I'd be happy
later,
to
yeah,
discuss that
we'll make
more.
record of it. We'll, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so let me start with the first question that I have in my mind. Actually, there are two distinct point of views to define the nature of human being. And some people postulate two competing constructs, namely an existential construct. In that, mean personhood is a state of being that is inherent and essential to the human species. And the other one is some kind of relational construct. In that, personhood is a state of a conditional state of value defined by society. And my question is actually, how can we conceptualize a human as a being living together with the other beings in a different way from the way that we understand a person as an individual entity? And so individual context and relational context. So you might provide some explanation about, is it okay? So something wrong with, can you hear me? So everybody
Yes.
here? Okay. Okay, so there are two different contexts, individual context and relational context to describe who are we, who are human beings. So you can provide some kind of process perspective and also interrelational perspective and together with the ecological perspective to uh, provide some good explanation about who we are in this era. So is it okay? So you can answer.
Well, yes, it's quite okay. Sure, I'll try. Okay, let me say that as I thought about how I could say some things that might be new to you rather than simply repeating old things, that I will talk about why it is that the Western and especially the modern West is so confused about life. The common sense and what we learn in universities are very, very different. And the reason is, I think, that common sense makes use of all of our senses and also of our memory and anticipation. But the university teaches us that the only reliable information is what we gain through our eyes. And I was often puzzled about that. And then I realized that the Indo-European languages are all based on vision. And when you base your thinking on vision, what you see are patches of color, but what you at the same time know, and touch plays a role here, is that these are not just patches of color floating in space. There is something that is colored, something in which the patches of color in here. And when you think about it, you end up with a view that underneath the phenomena, the appearances, there are substances. And so our language causes us to think in terms of substances. My Chinese friend Zhe Huang pointed out to me the ridiculousness of some of the features of the language. When there's rain outside, we don't just say there's rain, we say it is raining. Because our whole language is set up, you have to have a subject that is a substance. And then you talk about what that substance is doing or what is happening to that substance or what the characteristics of that substance are. But you can't get away from the fact that there are substances, and substances are thought of primarily, I mean, of course, there's great variety, but primarily as matter. So modern science is based on the idea that the world is composed of little bits of matter that are in motion. Matter in motion. And if you start out with that worldview, and you can all fill it in. I mean, I'm speaking in very sweeping terms. But if you start out with that worldview that the world is made up of bits of matter, life doesn't show up. Now you may think that some forms of motion reflect that, but you know, the original model that Descartes had in mind to show that there is no life, there is just complicated motions of matter. He got it from the Strasbourg clock. The Middle Ages were very technologically creative, and the clocks were their most complex handiwork. And every hour, on the hour, figures would come out and dance around. They looked very lifelike. So it showed that the fact that something danced did not mean it was different from other kinds of clock. It was just more complicated clockwork. Now, Descartes was a dualist, as we all know, and he didn't think that this applied to the human soul. So we have a world of machines and we have a human soul, but we really don't have life. And in the modern world, I mean, today in the university, in philosophy departments, that are very open and sensitive to the sciences, they think they can explain everything with this deterministic, materialistic model, in which life doesn't appear, with one exception. I mean, good many people make this statement, so it's interesting. They cannot explain consciousness. So the dualism of Descartes, of the mechanistic model of the world and the human immortal soul, is replaced by the reductionistic, mechanistic world and consciousness. We haven't advanced very much. But this whole thing works out this way because of fundamental assumptions, and the fundamental assumptions come from our language. And this is the language of India, and most of the languages of India are also substance languages, and Greek and Latin and all the modern European languages are structured in this way. Now, of course, people know that they are not just that. So in reaction to that kind of model of the world, they developed existentialism. And existentialism talked about what it's like to exist. You see, the model of the world is all based on objects. The idea of the object coming from visual objects. But we know that I'm doing the seeing, and I feel, and I have purposes, and I have commitments, and so forth. So existentialists then talked about what science didn't talk about. But it was still this very dualistic existentialists did not relate our experience even to our bodies. No, I don't mean no one did. I just speaking in sweeping terms of the dominant movement. So if you have a natural world that has no meaning, no purpose, no life, and then you know that you're alive and you have purposes and there are meanings and so forth, you can develop these two, but they were being developed in completely separate compartments. And really, neither of them gave us any sense of what life is. And so there are other languages that don't require us to think that way. And they include Chinese and Korean and Japanese. They also include Hebrew. So since many of us are Christian, and Hebrew is a very important language in shaping the biblical faith, the Hebrews took as their primary way of knowing what the world is, hearing rather than seeing. There's very little talk about what people look like. There's a lot of talk about what they say. And hearing leads to an I-thou relationship, whereas seeing leads to an I-it relationship. And if you base the world on hearing, you think of it as made up not only of sounds, but and sounds happen. You see, sounds don't, a particular sound doesn't sit there in the world like a table or a stone or a cup. It happens. So process thinking is biblical. I'll put it the other way. Biblical thinking is a form of process thinking. And although I don't think that Chinese and Korean and Japanese are so strongly on one side or the other of this divide, their language does not lift up substances as being the primary realities. It was very interesting a long time ago, 2,500 years ago, that Gautama, well, first Hindu thought based on Atman and Brahman. Atman is my substance, your substance. The individual human substance is the Atman. Brahman is the substance of the entire world, of everything. So Atman and Brahman seem to be the two ultimates. That's what you get to when you take away all the superficial stuff. And lots of the meditation that goes on in Hindu circles is to free yourself from taking all the other things very seriously until you get there. When you get there, you find out that Atman is simply Brahman and Brahman is Atman. Your substance, the substantial grounds of your being are the same as the substantial grounds of the being of all things. And Buddha meditated about this for a long time. And he came to the conclusion there is no Atman and there is no Brahman. And so what is there? Well, he wasn't so emphatic about what is. His main point is impermanence. The substances have a certain endurance through time. If nothing endures through time, if everything simply comes into being and ends, then there's nothing to cling to. Well, I think you probably all know enough about Buddhism. I don't need to give you a speech, but the historical fact that Buddhism never caught on in India, very few Buddhists in India, and most of them became Buddhists in order to escape the caste system. So, real understanding of Buddhism is very rare. But as soon as Buddha's message came to China and Korea and Japan, it fitted the culture, because the language that you speak doesn't make it hard to give up substance. Now, of course, I'm all on the Buddhist side of this argument, but I find that I don't mean it in superficial conversation. I can talk about process and so forth. Everybody understands. But to say that events are more fundamental than things is something that lots of Westerners have great difficulty with. An event has to be something somebody does, or something that happens to somebody or to something. And even though in the natural sciences, whatever is energy or has energy, and there are lots of things that have energy that don't have any matter. Mass is what physicists talk about when they're talking about matter. So, energy is universal. Not all forms of energy have mass. Nevertheless, the physicists still think in terms of mass as primary. And energy is something that mass has, so forth. And if you don't think against your language, and you speak a language about substances, and since scientists don't think about the matter in the way I'm talking about it at all, so scientists are still trying to understand the quantum world in terms of particles. And particle is another way of talking about substances, of course. Waves are obviously not substances. Waves happen. And so I think that Chinese and Koreans and Japanese, and of course some other people, there are many African languages and so forth that are not substance languages. Really, if they can avoid taking in the metaphysics of science as they study the sciences, if they keep thinking in their own languages instead of thinking in French or English or German, as they almost at one stage, the European languages control science. But I'm hoping that we're at a point now when leaving life out of the equation is doing so much, it's just so false to reality. And at the same time, it is leading to such harm. I wrote a book with Charles Birch, which we called The Liberation of Life. And we explained we wanted to liberate the concept of life as well as life itself. And the two are not disconnected. As long as we don't, I mean, everybody knows this life, you understand? But in the university, you're not taught that. So the more scholarly you become, the more nonsensical you become. It's really pretty bad. So I think the topic of life is extremely important. But unfortunately, our economic theory is based on a world without life. And our economic theory is the real theology of the Western world. And I think the West has taught much to the rest of the world to adopt it in a similar way. So if we operate out of the view of a lifeless world, but we all know there is life, and we all know we experience life, we are alive in some sense. Many of our problems are exacerbated or even caused by that. I find it utterly astonishing when people speak as if they can create machines that can do everything human beings can do. They can even think, because they understand human beings thinking to really be also mechanical. From my point of view, and I think from yours, it's obvious that the machine does not have its own life. We have our life to equate beings that have life, subjectivity, feeling, purposes, concerns, commitments with a machine, to equate beings like that to machines. Just because the machine can mimic so many of the things we do, it is amazing how many things machines can be made to do, far more than we would have guessed. But it's the way I describe the Western discussion of life is that people explain why there is no life, why they're zombies. That's really what we get taught in our universities, that everything that we do and say and think can be explained mechanistically. Then that's what a zombie is. Looks like a human being, but it's really a machine. Okay. So we try to persuade each other that we're zombies, and none of us believe it. I think that's a very unhealthy and really destructive mindset. So I believe that to understand that the world is made up of events, of activities, of actions, of experiences, is very important to break the stranglehold of thinking of the world in the other way. And once we do that, then the insights of existentialism can be appropriated. But one of the very important things that we need to learn, and we all know it, but is that our experiences are embodied experiences, our relation to our own bodies. I mean, I've read a fair amount of Heidegger, but you don't really know that the Dasein that you are studying is intricately interconnected with all kinds of bodily occurrences and events. But those relationships are between your experience and the events that are going on in your brain and in your body. That's very, very fundamental. And once you understand that your experience is made up of relationships, then you can understand that those relationships not only are to your own body, but they're to other people. And they're to grass and trees, the whole of the world around us. I am the entire universe as it exists in exactly this spot. Everything in the universe contributes in some way, however trivially, to my experience. And to really understand ourselves that way, and understand how much of what I'm composed of, you are also composed of, gives us a starting point. Now, I think you were asking about understanding ourselves in terms of participation in a culture, a nation, a religion, or something like that. And of course, I mean, my view is that relationships are absolutely primary. They are not always beneficial. Relationships can do bad things to us as well as good things. And the relationship that is cultivated in the world of substances is competition. no two substances can be in the same place at the same time. So we compete for space. But the substances are persistent, long-lasting individuals. And they, I mean, the whole Darwinian theory, not the neo-Darwin, Darwin's own theory, this is not particularly true, but in the neo-Darwinian theory, the struggle for, competitive struggle for existence, survival, is absolutely crucial. And when Lynn Margulis showed that synergy also played a role in the evolutionary process, the biologists wouldn't listen to her. She had all the evidence, she could prove it, but it has not been absorbed into the way in which biologists understand, because that substance model doesn't. So there are, I mean, no one denies there are relations, but if the major relation is that there's a scarcity of resources, and you and I have to compete for them, and everyone else, then we will certainly complete the destruction of the planet. Our economic theory is based on that, our political theory, it's so wrong. And so I think what if this has a practical meaning for you, let me say, think about all these matters in Korean. I don't think you will end up at quite the same place that the West has ended up. Now, I hope you understand. I think that the West's achievement in science are amazing, brilliant, and so forth, and I don't want to give them up. But we have ended up, you know, Immanuel Kant got very troubled about the fact that empirically he couldn't find any basis to think about the basis of science. Science is all a study of efficient causes. But philosophers were trying to base everything on visual experience, and you never see an efficient cause. It's a very good example of the primacy of sight, because if you pay a lot of attention to hearing, in a way, you experience that the waves of sound, especially if you have very loud music, you are experiencing the efficient cause of the motion of the air. But when Hume couldn't find it visually, he just said it's not empirical. And Kant didn't say, oh, you're wrong, you should have paid attention to hearing and tasting. Yeah. No. So stuck on seeing. Therefore, he embedded a complete separation between fact and value, the practical and the theoretical. And now we have an educational system that teaches people values play no role in the world. You can explain everything that happens, and bringing in notions of better and worse, right and wrong, beautiful or not, or ugly, doesn't enter into that picture whatsoever. It's absolutely false, but that's the main lesson of our schooling. I'm saying, I think until we can, at a deep level, think differently. And I think, I'm serious, I think that Koreans and Japanese and Chinese and Hebrews have, I don't mean that they may give too little place for some of the things that you get from sight. I'm not trying to say one is better than the other, but I'm trying to say the world is being ruled by a very one-sided understanding of experience. And all we have to do is to say, well, our most basic experience is right now my experience of my immediate past. my immediate past is flowing into the immediate present. Well, nothing like that is talked about by the substance folks, because they are interested in the I that is substantial and remains the same and unchanged. But if you look at your experience as fundamental, then you see that all the things that are happening in my body are affecting what I am. My past is, these are the most important influences. The most important influences are not mediated by the sense organs at all. Of course the sense organs are important, but to get our understanding of what is real in terms of the object of vision and nothing else, that is crazy. But when you speak a language that is sort of based on that kind of thinking, it's probably very hard to avoid. The physicist David Bohm, I don't know whether you've heard about him, but he was the leading quantum physicist. He taught us that we needed to speak and think in gerunds rather than in nouns. And of course, gerunds play a relatively small role in most English conversation. But if instead of having nouns that seem to point to separated things, you have gerunds which point to activities which are interconnected with each other, they could just shift the way we think. One of the great problems of Christianity has been that it comes out of Hebrew, which is non-substance, but as soon as it got settled into the Greco-Roman world, all these events had to have some substances lying behind them. So we have three substances. God is in three substances. That's crazy. That has nothing to do with the Hebrew God. But it creates all kinds of theological problems and conceptual problems and so forth. Doctrine is not something that the Bible is particularly interested in. To this day, Jews many Jews say there's no such thing as Jewish theology. Jews think in terms of history. The Bible is all about history. Now we need historical thinking and we need scientific thinking. So I sound like I'm being very anti toward that. But we need the scientific thinking to be informed by historical thinking, and the historical thinking to be informed by scientific thinking. And when we won't let them influence each other, and historical thinking is being pushed out of the university entirely. Even courses in history are not taught as in a historical way. They're simply taught to learn more and more facts about some particular event. But when I say historical thinking, I don't mean just because your topic is in the past. I mean, because you understand what you're talking about as the product of antecedent events. And it leads to other events. And what's happening now synthesizes the past and contributes to the future. So any event, if you're looking at the Civil War, you don't just isolate it from its past and its future. We're still working on those issues today in our society. And the way the blacks were emancipated and so forth has left all kinds of terrible consequences. And American policing was created in the South in order to imprison the blacks who had been freed, to enslave them by sticking them in prison and then use them in chain gangs to do the work that they didn't want to pay them for. We have to understand why blacks don't much like police. They were created to keep them subordinated. Of course, police do other things now beside that, and I'm not trying to abolish them. But if you don't think historically, you simply don't understand what's happening in the world. So historical thinking is all thinking about life. You see, science can only deal with things that can be repeated. It tries to deal with other things, but basically, many scientists will say that. What scientists are trying to find, what if A happens, then B happens. Well, then you have to have A repeated and B happens every time. And there's lots of stuff you can study that way. But history is a matter of unique and unrepeatable events. And there's something unrepeatable about every event. And there's a great deal that's repeatable about every event. So we need to work these things. It needs integration. And I think Whitehead did a marvelous job of moving us in that direction. He calls the things that make up the world organic mechanism. In other words, much of every event can be predicted if you know enough about the past. And it's reducible. It can be copied in mechanistic form. But no event can be exhaustively copied. And in some events, that little part that you can't copy becomes immensely important. It shapes the whole course of history. Now, to try to relate that a little more directly to what you were asking, I'll say, in my view, we all exist in our relations to others. We exist as a synthesis of relations. So to treat us as if we could be separated from our past is then wrong. And that means that if you're brought up in a particular culture, that's a very important part of who you are. But it never exhausts who you are. So to have said that somebody is an African, very interesting point about them, and there a lot follows from that. But of course, the same person who's in Africa may be a graduate of Harvard University. And that says a lot about it. But any one thing you say about a person can be true and doesn't determine everything else that can be said about a person. But for a healthy, a happy, a joyful life, we need to be individuals who are related to other individuals by sharing common goals, caring for each other, taking responsibility for each other. And that means in community. And I think when our life in community is really important, we cease being individuals, but we become persons in a much fuller sense. Individual still has this ring of separateness, but a personal life is the life of developed relationships. And of course, most of us, I've been very fortunate to have, my family was a wonderful community for me. The School of Theology was a wonderful community for me. Pilgrim Place has been a wonderful community for me. I mean, I know what communities are. They're where people take joy and great interest in each other's achievements. If you're in community, Oh, you can play games and have competition if you want that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, with a certain kind of competition. But the competition has to be in a context of cooperation. And if cooperation dominates, we can have a good future. The resources of the world will not support wars and struggles for mastery, where so many of our resources are now going. When we use them use the resources for those purposes, we are just condemning our great-grandchildren to extinction. Let's just say it. Okay? But if we will use resources to improve our communities, that it doesn't take so much. You see, we could develop wonderful communities that didn't have any motor transportation. But we're not trying to do that, because the people who make automobiles want us all to be dependent on automobiles. Southern California, many years ago, had a good transportation system. Goodyear tires, I think it was, maybe Goodrich, and General Motors bought up the transportation system and destroyed it, so that we would all have to buy automobiles. Well, can you imagine this waste?
And Professor Cobb, can I continue to ask another question? And
Yes,
this
of course.
very nice, actually very rich explanation about who we are and what life is. So you pointed out very nicely the limitation of a modern worldview that includes materialism, determinism, dualism, mechanism, reductionism, and also religious fundamentalism. And I was very impressed by your thought, your idea to reconcile all different kind of perspectives in terms of perspective, process, perspective, and also relational perspective. And let me give you already covered my second question. That is about actually there are many different explanations about life inspired by scientific knowledge, philosophical theories, and also religious beliefs. So you already covered my second question very nicely. So let me give you another question that I have in my mind for a long time as a professor. Actually, I have been in academia for actually about more than 20 years, and you have been in academia for a long time, much longer than I had. But my question is that actually you are very deeply involved in eco-civic movement. You are the founder of eco-civic movement as activist. So what motivates you to become an activist from academic perspective? So how we can reconcile academic perspective and also social perspective to pursue some kind of higher value in this society. So I would like to hear a little bit about your motivation. So.
Well, I think that I have never liked academics if they are defined the way they have been defined in the West. I was very, very fortunate that I didn't know what I was doing, but when I was in the Army in World War II. And when I got out of the Army, I went to the University of Chicago. And the University of Chicago was organized around the idea that the purpose of the university was to help people think. And that kind of academics I love. when I went to the divinity school, the professor said, okay, now you're going to be with us for 2 or 3 years. What we want is for you to think about your beliefs about important matters. And when you can articulate what you believe and be prepared to defend it, we give you your degree. Okay, that kind of academics I never want to get rid of. But they have almost completely disappeared from universities. That has been replaced by the German Wissenschaften. And I translate the Wissenschaften as academic discipline. And the academic disciplines are designed not to get people to think, but to get people to produce slight advances in a particular, rather restrictedly defined area. Okay, and that's called research. And there, you are taught that in order to do good research, you get rid of all your values. Your values get in the way of doing good research. So there is a book written by a leading educator to his colleagues, and it is called Save the World on Your Own Time. You're not being paid for that. So if you as a human being are interested in leaving a good home, for a good context for your children and grandchildren, you can work on that, but not until you've put in your 40-hour week of academics. That's what you're paid for. Now, universities haven't always been like that, but that's what the modern university is in its fullest expression. And I fortunately never had to teach in a modern university. I was never invited to teach in a modern university. No modern university would want what I have to offer. I happen to be very fortunate in that the president who founded the Claremont School of Theology had been the president of the University of Chicago. At the time, Chicago was still struggling against the academic disciplines to be a place that encouraged people to think. And so we had a seminary that encouraged us to think. I'm just very fortunate. So it's never been a temptation to me to suppose that thinking and values are unrelated to each other. So when I realized in 1968, I guess, that the world was on an unsustainable path. That meant if we kept going, we'd destroy it. When I realized that, I thought, well, that's important. Not just one important thing alongside 100 others. It has a comprehensive importance that needs to shape the way I look at everything. So from my point of view, I was able within educational establishments to do things that I thought needed to be done and could be helpful. So I didn't have a problem. Oh. But if I had been told, oh, you mustn't do that, or at least you can only do that on Sundays or something, I would have had to face a very difficult choice, but I think I would have gotten out of academia. This problem even among, not a problem, but a difference of emphasis, even among people who are influenced by Whitehead. There are some who want to do research on Whitehead. I think that's fine. But it's only fine if it contributes to ultimately to improving the quality of life, the quality of understanding, the depth of our perceptions and so forth. But academia doesn't care whether it improves anything or not.
Thank you, Professor. Actually, I think there might be some other questions from audience.
I
So
hope so.
yeah, and so let me give you a very short question before I encourage other people to bring up some other questions. And what might the post-pandemic life look like? Did you hear me? So what might life be like after? Okay, so the post-pandemic life. This is about post-pandemic life. So what might a post-pandemic life look like?
Post-pandemic life. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. Well, of course, I don't know. That's the first answer. I know that there are powerful people in the world today, rich and powerful, that tends to go together, who are figuring out how they can extract more money from the rest of us and concentrate more money in fewer hands. And since the rest of us are not very well organized to resist, there's great danger that they will carry the worst tendencies of the past 50 years forward. And the post-pandemic life will be one in which more people are hungry, and there are a few more billionaires with a few more billions. And in the United States, the two political parties that we have are both the servants of those rich people. And that will become even more so. So that's, if I'm just predicting, and I'm in a pessimistic mood, I would say democracy is over, and the rich and powerful will have total control over the rest of us, and it'll be a rather small group. Okay, now let me say, I don't think we have to go that way. And I think that there are far more people I'll just talk about the United States, because I don't think it's the same in every country, and may be very different in Korea. But for a very long time, people, even if they at one level believed that we were living unsustainable lives, didn't really feel it. It wasn't the motivating factor. But what has happened in the last months has made people understand what climate change is all about. And they've also understood that there are other problems, and that radical solutions, radical change is possible. If a year ago you had told most Americans, including me, that for 6 months we would all be segregated from each other, just, describe the situation, that, oh, I don't think that one, I can't imagine that happening. You couldn't imagine it happening. But now it's happened, you can imagine it. And that helps in the sense the changes we need to make to save the world are at least as radical as that. But the fact that changes are radical doesn't automatically exclude it in the way it did a few months ago. Also, there are issues that we are now dealing with, even politically, that could not be mentioned for a long time. Very recently, the vast majority of Americans have. I'm in my study.
Oh, okay.
If you can put the drops in mine.
Yes, I can put on. I want to put on makeup. So is the computer working?
Yes. See, I'm talking to the Koreans.
Hello.
Hello.
She's the one who solved my computer problem last night.
Oh.
She's so happy now. Okay, without glasses it's
Oh,
better.
she thinks it's better to take off glasses before.
Okay, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, John, so we skip the ointment tonight.
Hmm?
We skip the ointment. We skip the ointment tonight.
Oh, okay. All right.
Hi, Professor Cobb, I think it's time for us to move to the audience, actually.
All right.
Audience might
Okay.
have questions.
Yeah.
혹시 질문 있으시면은 직접 질문해 주시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
일단 김양희 선생님.
네, 김양희 선생님, 그 아까 질문 하나 있으셨는데, 양희 킴,
나가셨나? 아니.
Unmute.
yeah. Okay.
Do you want me to say it again? Because it's been delivered to Professor Cobb already. Okay. Hello, Professor Cobb. Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I'm asking not as a scholar, but as an activist. I'm Yang Hee Kim. I belong to an NGO called Korean Women's Environmental Network.
Yes.
They're based on ecofeminism. Yes, I was reading your book, that was published in 2018, translated by Dr. Han Yun-jung. And I came across with your statement that's saying that ecofeminism is one of the most important development in terms of
Yes.
contributions made in America to promote healthy planet. And I was wondering what were the basis of your statement. That's my one question.
Okay.
Another question is that.
Let me do one at a time.
Oh, all right. Okay.
I often get mixed up if too much is happening. Okay. Most of the liberation movements, I believe in liberation of everything, so I'm not being critical, did not deal deeply with ultimate philosophical questions. What we might call, they operated within the accepted metaphysics. Oh, they may have pushed it in different ways, but at least the ecofeminists thought it was important to change our basic understanding. And so one of their great emphases was on the primacy of relationships. And the way they formulated that, I won't say it would necessarily be the same as Whitehead's way of formulating it, but it was extremely congenial. And since I think it's so important to overthrow this individual substance model, and they were attacking that same model with very similar means, and to do it with gender, pointing out the gender biases in the model, that the model we have inherited has been a patriarchal model. And our metaphysics has been a patriarchal metaphysics. That, from my point of view, helped to relativize the ideas. Those are men's ideas. And then women have different ideas. Then the men's ideas no longer look like they're just the obvious truth that everybody knows. So from my point of view, bringing the gender issue to bear upon the deepest assumptions was a tremendous contribution. I think I could say other things, but I hope that is enough of an answer. Now,
Okay,
question two.
Yes, you are running an organization.
Yeah, you would ask.
Yes. you are running the organization, NGO, EcoSafe. Within your organization, are there any ecofeminists or ecofeminist, projects going on based on ecofeminism?
Any feminists?
Yes.
Well, at the time, ecological issues and feminist issues were being discussed together, and the development of a new theology. So eco-theology, we'll say. Feminist eco-theology.
Mm-hmm.
Claremont was one of two centers of that discussion. So I had, I guess, 5 or 6 women, PhDs, who were Whiteheadians and ecofeminists. And the two have been very congenial with each other. So they have been very much involved in the Center for Process Studies and other process organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the theologian who is most active today is Catherine Keller. She's one of those. Marjorie Suhaki was another of those who you may have come. I mean, I don't mean just to give you a list of names. I could give you that if you email me. I could give you a list of 6.
Yes, I would like that very much.
Please email me, and if I don't
Yes.
respond, email me again.
Yes, I will. Huh? Okay,
I get about 150 emails a day, and sometimes I delete them too quickly without noticing that
actually,
they're only asking me for money.
Professor Cobb?
Mhm.
Professor Cobb, Yang Yi's question was not about ecofeminism in general, but more specifically, any ecofeminist project in your organization?
In my organization? Well, I was the Center for Process Studies. The Center for Process Studies is my organization, but I mean, I have quite a number of organizations. But yes,
EcoSafe.
but there are definitely ecofeminists in most of them.
Thank you.
Okay, let's have only one question, okay, before we. Okay, is there anybody who wants to ask Professor Cobb? Enough? Okay. I think, yeah, Professor Cobb, this special session was very nice, and I greatly appreciate that you participated in our 5th anniversary conference, and very rich philosophical insight, and also, I mean, we are very happy to have you in this conference. So I hope that you have a very good night today, and so we hope to see you again. Okay, thank you very much.
You. I'll say good night, but what time of day is it there? About noon?
Yeah, about 11 o'clock. Yeah, okay.
11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
수고하셨습니다.
고맙습니다.
고맙습니다.
내일 또 뵙겠습니다.
네, 잘 들려요.